Today is Sunday, August 23rd, 2026, and it's National Sponge Cake Day. Traditional sponge cake gets much of its lift from whipped eggs, which means somebody looked at a bowl of egg foam and thought, you know what this needs? Dessert. And somehow they were right. Today we've got a bank robbery that created a psychological term people still argue about. An airplane that one of aviation's greatest designers reportedly thought might sink the company. And a country whose elected lawmakers eventually voted for it to stop existing. So let's start with the bank robber whose list of demands included money, transportation, and having one of his old prison buddies delivered to him. Welcome to Wait, That's Random, This Day in History. I'm C.L. Burns, voice actor, audiobook narrator, and someone who keeps finding historical stories that sound completely fake until you realize they actually happened. On the morning of August 23, 1973, Jan Erik Olsson walked into a bank in downtown Stockholm carrying a submachine gun. Now, Olsson was already a convicted criminal. In fact, he was currently serving a prison sentence. He just happened to be out on furlough. Apparently, Sweden's prison system at the time trusted inmates with a little time away, and Olsson responded to that trust by robbing a bank. So I think it's safe to say the furlough program had experienced a setback. Police arrived quickly, and what started as a robbery turned into a hostage situation. Olsson took 4 bank employees captive and moved them into the bank's vault. Then he gave authorities his demands. He wanted 3 million Swedish kroner, a bulletproof vest, a getaway car, and the release of Clark Olofsson, one of Sweden's most notorious criminals. Not only did he ask the government to bring another convicted criminal into an active hostage situation, the government actually did it. Clark was removed from prison and taken to the bank. And at this point, the whole thing was being followed on live television. Sweden was watching as 2 criminals and 4 hostages remained trapped together inside a bank vault. The standoff lasted nearly 6 days. During that time, something happened that confused the police and fascinated the public. Some of the hostages began to show more trust in their captors than in the authorities outside. One hostage, Kristen Enmark, even spoke directly with Swedish Prime Minister Olof Palme by telephone. She told him she was afraid the police would storm the bank and get them killed. She wanted the authorities to let the captors take the hostages with them in the getaway car. Think about that for a second. She was being held at gunpoint, but from inside that vault, the people attempting a rescue seemed like the greater immediate danger. Police finally pumped tear gas into the vault on August 28th. Olsson and Olofsson surrendered, and all 4 hostages came out alive. But their behavior didn't fit the simple story people expected. The hostages hadn't behaved as though every move made by the police was helpful, or every action taken by the criminals was equally threatening. A psychiatrist advising the police described their reaction as Normalstorg syndrome, named after the square where the bank stood. Outside Sweden, it became known as Stockholm syndrome. And here's where the story gets even stranger. Stockholm syndrome isn't an official psychiatric diagnosis, and the label remains controversial. Some experts describe the behavior as a survival response rather than affection for a captor. Enmark herself has argued that she wasn't irrationally siding with the criminals. She was making judgments about who, at any given moment, seemed most likely to keep her alive. So one of the world's best-known psychological terms came from a psychiatrist explaining the behavior of a hostage he reportedly never even interviewed. That term became famous. The airplane in our next story nearly became famous for an entirely different reason: bankrupting the company that built it. In the early 1950s, the United States Air Force wanted a new military transport. It needed to carry troops and heavy equipment, operate from rough airfields, and load cargo through a large ramp at the back. Lockheed's engineers came up with a 4-engine turboprop aircraft that wasn't especially sleek or glamorous. It looked less like the future of aviation and more like somebody had taught a warehouse to fly. Even Kelly Johnson, the legendary engineer behind Lockheed's Skunk Works, reportedly thought the project was a terrible idea. He warned that taking the contract could sink the company. Fortunately, the people designing the plane didn't listen. On August 23, 1954, test pilots Stan Belts and Roy Weimer prepared the second C-130 prototype for its first flight in Burbank, California. The plane used only 855 feet of runway. 10 seconds after beginning its takeoff roll, it was airborne. And that boxy aircraft flew to Edwards Air Force Base without sinking Lockheed, or itself. It became the C-130 Hercules. The Air Force wanted a cargo plane. What it got was a basic design that could be adapted into a troop transport, gunship, flying hospital, weather research aircraft, search and rescue plane, aerial tanker, firefighting aircraft, and even a hurricane hunter. C-130s have landed on snow, dirt, ice, and aircraft carriers. Some have been fitted with skis. Others have carried satellites, evacuated patients, fought wildfires, and flown directly into hurricanes. And the aircraft that was supposed to be a dangerous business gamble went on to achieve the longest continuous production run of any military airplane in history. More than 70 years after that first 855-foot takeoff, new versions of the Hercules are still being built. And while the Hercules became a machine that simply refused to disappear, our last story is about an entire country that chose exactly when it would. To understand how strange that was, we need to go back to 1989. Germany had been divided since the end of World War II. West Germany was a democracy aligned with the United States and Western Europe. East Germany was a communist state backed by the Soviet Union, and the Berlin Wall had become the most visible symbol of that division. Then on November 9, 1989, an East German official accidentally made history during a press conference. He was announcing new travel rules and was asked when they would take effect. He shuffled through his notes and said essentially, "As far as I know, immediately." They weren't supposed to take effect immediately, but East Germans heard the announcement on television and rushed to the border crossings. The guards had no clear instructions. The crowds kept growing, and eventually the gates opened. Less than a year later, East Germany's parliament faced an extraordinary question. Should the country continue trying to rebuild itself as an independent democracy, or should it join West Germany? On the night of August 22, 1990, lawmakers gathered for a special session. The debate became emotional, went on for hours, and didn't reach its decisive vote until just before 3 a.m. on August 23rd. By a vote of 294 to 62, with 7 abstentions, the parliament declared that East Germany would join the Federal Republic of Germany on October 3rd. They didn't technically pass a bill saying this country will self-destruct in 41 days, but that was the practical result. When October 3rd arrived, East Germany's territory joined the Federal Republic, Berlin was formally reunited, and the German Democratic Republic ceased to exist. A nation that had lasted more than 40 years ended not through invasion or collapse, but because its own freely elected lawmakers scheduled the date when it would no longer be a separate country. And speaking of changing names and becoming something new, today's birthday started life as Richard Louis Springthorpe. He grew up in Australia, often moving between military bases because his father was an army officer. As a teenager, he played in bands, and at 19 he traveled to South Vietnam to entertain Australian troops. He later joined a group called Zoot, whose attempt to attract attention involved dressing its members head to toe in pink satin. It worked, although people remembered our clothes is not necessarily the same as people respected our music. Richard eventually shortened his name, moved to the United States, and tried to build a solo career. When music didn't immediately make him a star, he turned to acting. He appeared on shows including The $6 Million Man and The Rockford Files, before landing the role of a handsome young doctor on General Hospital. Then his 2 careers took off at almost exactly the same time. In 1981, television viewers knew him as Dr. Noah Drake. Radio listeners knew him as the jealous guy singing about wanting his friend's girlfriend. Here's the best part. The real friend who inspired the song wasn't named Jessie. His name was Gary. But Gary's girl didn't sound right, So Gary was quietly renamed Jessie and became one of the most famous unseen people in pop music. The song reached number 1 and won the Grammy for Best Male Rock Vocal Performance. Born on August 23, 1949, today's birthday belongs to Rick Springfield, the musician, actor, and only person in today's episode who changed his name without requiring a late-night vote of Parliament. Today gave us a robbery that became a psychological label, an airplane expected to become a corporate disaster, and a country that chose the date of its own ending. The familiar versions sound tidy only because we already know how everything turned out. For the people inside the bank, the engineers watching that first takeoff, and the lawmakers voting near 3 a.m, none of it was tidy yet. Anyway, if somebody offers me sponge cake today, I'm not going to overthink it. After this episode, I'll mainly be impressed that it survived until lunchtime. And as Douglas Adams put it, time is an illusion. Lunchtime doubly so. If you'd like to hear more of my narration work, podcasts, or other projects, you can find everything at waitthat'srandom.com. I'm C.L. Burns, and thanks for taking a weird little walk through history with me. I'll see you tomorrow.